You know that feeling? You're looking at a stack of reports, articles, maybe even some really complex document outlining a framework for how things should work in an organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you need to get the key insights, the stuff that actually matters, without getting completely lost in every single detail. Information overload is just, it's constant, isn't it?
It really is. And frameworks, well, they're incredibly useful, but sometimes they can almost add to that feeling, you know? They lay out this really comprehensive structure, which is the whole point, of course. But navigating that structure, figuring out why it's built that way and what the most important bits are for you, that can be a real challenge.
Absolutely. It's like being given the keys to a massive library, but needing a librarian to point you to the specific section, the right shelf, maybe even the exact paragraph that has the answer you need right now.
That's a great analogy.
And that's pretty much our job here on the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into some source material that presents a really structured way of thinking about how organizations govern and manage their information and technology, their INT.
Specifically, we're going to unpack a really core part of this framework, focusing on what it calls the align, plan, organize domain. You should think of this as the foundational layer. It's where the enterprise figures out its INT strategy, sets up all the necessary structures and plans how resources are going to be used, all that before any major building or operational work even kicks off.
Okay, so our mission today is to guide you through this section of the source material. We're going to approach this a bit like instructors, walking you through a structured guide.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll break down the key objectives within this align, plan, organize, or APO domain, explain what they're about, how they connect, and really pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge so you can get a solid grasp of the core ideas and why they matter.
Yes, and we'll take it step by step. We'll cover each objective in the sequence the source material lays them out. Because it's not just a random collection of tasks, there's a logic to it.
A flow.
Right, a logical progression. It starts with setting the strategic direction and getting organized, moves through managing the resources and relationships needed for that planning, and finally puts foundational controls in place for areas like, well, quality, risk, security, and data management.
And the scope with an APO is, wow, it's really broad when you look at it. We'll explore objectives covering INT strategy, enterprise architecture, fostering innovation, managing investment portfolios, handling budgets and costs, managing the people side, human resources, building stakeholder relationships, setting up service agreements, dealing with suppliers, ensuring quality, managing risk, protecting security, and even handling the data itself. It's a really comprehensive look at that whole strategic and planning side of INT.
It is. And before we jump into the specific objectives, maybe it's worth quickly orienting ourselves. The source material makes a distinction between governance and management.
Good point. Governance is the high-level stuff.
Generally, yeah. Often the responsibility of the board or senior execs. It's about evaluating options, directing decisions, monitoring performance, basically ensuring value delivery, optimizing risk, optimizing resources. Think of it like setting the overall mandate and ensuring accountability.
Okay, setting the direction from the top.
And then there's management. That's more the domain of executive management and senior or middle management. Their role is to plan, build, run, and monitor INT activities, but critically in alignment with that governance direction.
Got it.
And this APO domain, the one we're focusing on today, it sits firmly within that management layer. It's where all that strategic planning and organizational setup happens.
Right. And this framework, it has other management domains too, doesn't it? Like building things, running things.
It does. There are 4 management domains mentioned: APO, align, plan, organize, which is our focus. Then BAI, build, acquire, implement, DSS, deliver, service, support, and MEA, monitor, evaluate, assess. But today, yeah, just APO, the planning and organizing foundation.
Okay, so APO is essentially the plan part of plan, build, run, monitor, plus the organize you need to do that planning well. And the source material, it structures each objective within APO and the other domains too, very consistently, right?
It does, yeah. For each objective, it outlines the core process and breaks that down into specific management practices and activities, what you need to do.
Okay.
Then it identifies the relevant components of the governance system needed for those practices, things like, you know, the right organizational structures, how information flows, the necessary skills and people.
Policies, culture.
Exactly. Defined policies and procedures, the right culture and ethical environment, and supporting services or infrastructure. It also lists key inputs and outputs for the practices, what information goes in, what comes out.
And how do you know if you're doing it well?
Well, it suggests example metrics to measure performance, and sometimes it points to related external guidance or standards like ISO or ITIL.
So when we look at each APO objective, it's not just a title. We're seeing like a defined set of activities, the resources and structures needed, what info goes in and out, and how to measure success. It's a pretty holistic view.
Precisely. And the source also mentions something called capability levels for the activities within each practice.
Capability levels, what are those about?
Think of them as representing the maturity of how that activity is performed. It usually ranges from level 0, meaning it's not happening at all, maybe up to level 5, which is like fully optimized best practice.
Okay.
We might mention some of these levels if they highlight something interesting about expected maturity, but honestly, the key takeaway for today is understanding what needs to be done, not getting bogged down in assigning a number.
Got it. Focus on the what's and why. Okay, that structure makes sense. Let's dive into the first objective then. APO01, Managed INT Management System. The name itself kind of implies this is where it all starts with an APO.
It really does. The core purpose of APO1, it's to design, implement, and maintain the entire system for managing enterprise INT.
The whole system.
Yeah. If the overall framework is the map, APO1 is the process of actually building the compass, the steering wheel, maybe the dashboard for the car. It sets up the foundational elements that enable all the other INT management activities.
Okay, so it's fundamental. What does designing and maintaining that system actually involve, according to the source?
Well, it includes practices like obviously designing the management system itself, but importantly, this isn't a one-off task.
Right, it needs maintaining.
Exactly. It involves activities like regularly assessing how well the different parts of your management system are actually performing, identifying what's most critical and where you need to improve, prioritizing those improvements, and then, actually implementing them.
So it's a cycle. Assess, prioritize, improve.
Right. And the source points out that assessing component performance is often expected at a higher capability level, say level 4, while defining, prioritizing, and implementing improvements might be more like level 3.
What does that suggest?
It suggests that really understanding how well your system works requires a bit more organizational maturity than just, making changes to it. Evaluation is harder than just doing.
Interesting. So it's not just having a system, but being able to evaluate and improve it effectively.
Yeah.
And once it's designed, I assume you have to communicate it.
Oh, absolutely. APO1 includes practices specifically focused on communicating objectives, direction, and decisions. This management system, its policies, structures, plans, it needs to be clearly understood throughout the organization.
Makes sense.
And the source even lists things like risk impact communication as an input here, which highlights that critical information, like potential risks, needs to flow through established channels defined by this management system.
So communication isn't just tacked on, it's an integral part of the system itself. What about the organizational side of things, structures, teams?
That's crucial. Practices like defining and implementing organizational structures, that's APO 1.04, are fundamental. This means establishing the formal teams, committees, reporting lines needed for INT management.
The org chart for IT management.
Kind of, but more than just the chart. It involves defining what each part of the structure is actually responsible for, making sure it aligns with the enterprise's overall structure and architecture, setting up things like steering committees, and crucially, verifying that these structures are actually effective and adequate.
Verifying they work.
Yeah, and that's noted as an activity needing level 4 capability. So again, not just drawing boxes, but really ensuring the structure works and supports the goals.
And within that structure, people need clear roles, presumably.
Exactly, which leads right into establishing roles and responsibilities, APO 1.05. This practice zooms in on assigning specific duties and accountabilities to individuals and teams, making sure there's clear understanding of who does what, especially around key decision points.
Avoids finger-pointing later.
Hopefully. It also touches on planning for continuity, identifying backups, cross-training people. That's essential for resilience. And the example metrics the source gives here really highlight the practical outcome. Things like the number of INT-related roles assigned or the number of completed role descriptions.
So concrete outputs.
Yeah, it's about making sure people know what's expected of them.
That makes a lot of sense. Structure and clear roles are definitely foundational. What else is involved in setting up this core system?
Well, the source talks about optimizing the placement of the IT function APO 01.06.
Where IT sits in the company.
Exactly. This acknowledges that where the IT department or function sits within the broader company structure can significantly impact its effectiveness and alignment. This decision is usually driven by the overall enterprise strategy and how the company operates.
And the output of that decision.
It's a defined operational placement for IT. And interestingly, this evaluation feeds into the architecture domain, APO03, showing how these structural decisions influence the technical blueprints later on.
Strategic decision with architectural implications. And tying into structure and roles, what about defining ownership for the actual information and systems? That sounds critical.
It is hugely important. Define information, data, and system ownership, APO 1.07. Right here, at the very beginning of planning and organizing, the framework says you need to establish clear accountability for enterprise data and the systems that process it.
Not just a technical task, then.
Definitely not. It's about governance, responsibility. And look at the outputs of this practice. Data classification guidelines, data security and control guidelines. What this really tells us is that getting clarity on who owns the data and systems right here in APO01 is non-negotiable.
Why so critical?
Because without clear ownership defined here, all the downstream processes managing data in APO14, handling security in DSOS5 and DSS06, even building new solutions in BAO02, they'll struggle with ambiguity. That leads to potential quality issues, security gaps, compliance failures. You name it. It's absolutely foundational for good data governance.
Wow. Okay, so that single practice, defining ownership, has major ripple effects across the entire framework. It really hammers home that data isn't just a technical thing. It needs clear business ownership defined from the very start.
Couldn't agree more.
What about the skills needed to actually run this whole management system?
That's APO 01.08. Define required skills and competencies. You need to identify what skills are necessary for the INT organization to actually achieve its management objectives. And then, critically, analyze any gaps between the skills you have and the skills you need.
To measure that.
Yep. A key metric mentioned is the % of staff who possess the required skills and competencies. And this practice links directly to APO U7, the objective focused specifically on managing human resources, where the plans to actually address these skill gaps would be developed and executed.
Okay, so APO01 identifies the need, and APO07 manages the solution for people skills and policies, procedures.
Define and communicate policies and procedures, APO 01.09. This is about formalizing the rules of engagement for the INT management system.
Writing the rulebook.
Exactly. But it's not enough just to have policies. You need processes to assess their performance, identify which policies are critical to specific business processes, prioritize improvements to those policies, and then implement the changes.
So policies aren't static.
Not at all. This highlights that policy management itself is a process requiring assessment and improvement. Some activities here are noted at level 4 capability, and the metrics mentioned again link back to system effectiveness, like the number of loss exposures due to inadequate control design. It shows that poor or outdated policies can directly lead to negative business outcomes.
So policies are living documents needing active management. Anything else rounding out this foundational APO01 objective?
Yeah, a couple more quick ones. Establishing a management methods and standards approach APO01.0. That's about standardizing how management activities are performed, establishing consistent methodologies.
Consistency.
Right. And finally, defining the process capability and performance management approach, APO01.11. This practice is about deciding how you will measure the capability and effectiveness of the INT management processes themselves. It takes input from enterprise governance guiding principles, from the EDM domain, the governance layer, and outputs metrics related to process capability levels. And those levels can then inform strategy development in APO2.
Okay, so APO1 truly is the bedrock. It defines the entire INT management system, its structure, roles, ownership, for critical things like data and systems, policies, methods, and even how you'll assess its own performance. And it provides crucial inputs like those data classification guidelines or process capability levels that feed into strategy, architecture, data management, basically everything else that follows in the EPO domain and beyond. It's like the essential organizational plumbing.
Couldn't have said it better. You can't effectively plan or operate INT without this foundation firmly in place.
Right. Okay, deep breath. That's the management system itself. Now, once you have the system designed, where do you actually point it? What's the direction? That brings us to APO02. Manage strategy. What's the core purpose here?
This objective is all about defining and maintaining the INT strategy, making sure it's in really tight alignment with the overall enterprise strategy.
Aligning IT with the business goals.
Exactly. It's about translating those high-level business goals into a clear direction and roadmap specifically for INT. Without this alignment, INT risks, pursuing initiatives that don't truly support where the business needs to go.
So it must start with really understanding what the business is trying to achieve.
Precisely. The first practice is Understand Enterprise and Environment APO 02.01. This involves summarizing the enterprise strategy and objectives and starting to assess where I&T currently stands. What are its capabilities? How is it performing? Activities here are noted at level 2 capability, meaning it's about achieving a basic understanding and initial assessment, just knowing the business context I&T needs to operate within.
And then drilling down into the current state of INT itself.
Yes. Determine the current environment's capabilities and performance, APO 02.02. This practice involves inventorying existing INT capabilities. What do we have right now? How well does it actually work? It includes conducting a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats specifically for INT in relation to that business context.
How do you measure that alignment?
Metrics like the percent of enterprise objectives addressed by INT goals or the percent of INT objectives that actively support the enterprise strategy are key here. They show how the current INT state measures up against the business direction. These activities are also generally at level 2 capability.
Okay, so understand the business context, assess where INT is now. That clearly identifies the gap, right, between where you are and where you need to be. So then you need to define the desired future state.
You got it. Define target digital capabilities, APO 02.03. This is where you envision the future. What INT-enabled capabilities, services, products does the enterprise need to achieve its strategic goals?
So what does IT need to do for the business?
Exactly. This involves detailing those required services, considering the value these future capabilities will bring, and preparing a statement that clearly articulates that value. And interestingly, activities like considering value and preparing the value statement are noted at level 4 capability, indicating the need for a mature value assessment process. Metrics, again, reinforce the linkage. Do the target INT objectives actually support the enterprise strategy?
So you're defining the future state capabilities. Is there a difference between capabilities and the environment?
Yes, that's the next practice. Define the target environment, APO 002.04. This practice specifies the future INT environment, the underlying infrastructure, applications, data structures needed to deliver those target capabilities.
The how versus the what.
Kind of. And it takes inputs like your current process capability levels from APO 1.11, highlighting that your future plans need to be realistic based on your organization's ability to execute.
Makes sense. Can't aim for Mars if you can barely build a car.
Right. And fascinatingly, it also takes input from risk analysis results from APO 12.02. This is a critical connection we'll see again. Your strategic target environment isn't just some technical ideal. It must be informed by the potential risks you might face in getting there or operating it.
So strategy and risk are linked from the start.
Absolutely. The output here is a target model gap analysis, which is a crucial piece of information for pretty much all other planning, building, running, and monitoring activities down the line.
That link to risk is powerful. It means strategic planning isn't happening in a vacuum. It's inherently tied to what you can actually manage and secure. Okay, so once you know the gap between your current state and your desired future state for both capabilities and environment, you need a plan to actually get there.
That's defined the strategic plan and roadmap, APO 02.05. This is where you develop the overall strategic plan and the step-by-step roadmap for implementing the necessary changes.
The journey plan.
Exactly. Activities include defining specific initiatives or programs to close those identified gaps and detailing the timeline, resources, actions needed. These planning activities are typically at level 3 capability. And this practice pulls together inputs from various places, the budget from APO 6, approved resources from APO 7 and elsewhere, even the innovation plan from APO 4. It shows how strategy is really the culmination of various planning elements.
It brings it all together.
And the strategic roadmap itself is a key output, feeding back into the foundational management system, APO 01, potentially shaping how it needs to evolve.
The strategy literally helps shape the system that will execute it. That's neat. And after defining this whole path forward, you have to tell people about it.
Communicate the INT strategy, APO 002.06. This involves developing a clear communication plan for the strategy, preparing the message effectively for different audiences, building support for the plan across the organization, and obtaining feedback to make sure it's understood and accepted.
Getting buy-in.
Crucial. And activities like obtaining feedback are noted at level 4 capability, emphasizing the importance of effectively verifying understanding and buy-in. Metrics for APO2 overall really reinforce the outcomes you're looking for. Things like the level of stakeholder support for the transformation plan, the financial viability of the initiatives in the plan, and ultimately, the degree of correspondence between the I&T strategy and the enterprise strategy.
So APO 002 is the compass and the map. It starts with understanding where the business wants to go, assessing the I&T starting point, envisioning the future state, both capabilities and environment, informed by risk, planning the journey, the roadmap, informed by budget and resources, and communicating it widely. It's deeply connected to the foundational APO 01, informed by risk, APO 12, funded by budget, APO 6, reliant on resources, APO 7, and potentially fueled by innovation, APO 4. It really sets the high-level direction for everything else.
And that direction requires a detailed blueprint to be executed effectively.
Which brings us nicely to APO 03, Managed Enterprise Architecture. What's the purpose of this objective?
Well, if APO 02 is the strategic direction, the where are we going, then APO 03 is about creating the cohesive, detailed blueprint of the entire enterprise from an I&T perspective.
The technical plan.
More than just technical. It covers business architecture, information architecture, application architecture, and technology architecture. It's about ensuring all the pieces, business processes, data flows, software, hardware fit together properly to support the strategy's execution.
Okay, the master blueprint. So like any blueprint, it probably starts with a high-level vision.
Exactly. Define and maintain the enterprise architecture vision, APO 03.01. This involves setting that high-level picture for the architecture, understanding the strategic drivers behind it, defining the scope of the architecture work, and confirming the fundamental principles that will guide all architecture decisions.
Principles like?
Things like maybe using standard technologies wherever possible, designing for modularity, prioritizing cloud first, whatever the guiding rules are. It even involves building a business case for the architecture effort itself, demonstrating its value.
Justifying the blueprint effort.
Right. The source lists activities here across capability levels 2 through 4, showing increasing maturity in how organizations define and justify their architectural vision. And importantly, inputs include enterprise governance guiding principles, meaning the architecture principles should align with the overall principles set by the organization's governance. A key output is the set of architecture principles themselves, which are crucial inputs for many other objectives, especially down in the building domain, BAI. Metrics track things like the % of enterprise goals supported by these architecture principles.
Okay, so principles are the ground rules for the blueprint. Once you have the vision and principles, you start detailing the different layers of the enterprise.
Define and maintain architecture domains, APO 03.02. This is where the blueprint gets really detailed across those different domains we mentioned. Business architecture, how the business actually operates, its processes. Information architecture, how data and information flow, how they're structured. Application architecture, how software applications are organized and interact. And technology architecture, the underlying hardware, networks, infrastructure.
Breaking it down.
Yep. Activities involve documenting both the baseline, the current state, the ASIS, and the future state, the to-be architectures for each of these domains. These are typically noted at capability level 3. And this practice pulls in inputs from APO 1, like those data classification guidelines, and the defined placement of the IT function we talked about earlier. It shows how those foundational organizational decisions directly influence the architecture.
Everything's connected.
It really is. Key outputs here include detailed descriptions of the baseline domains and definitions of the architecture, which are widely used across APO, BAI, and DSS domains.
So this gives you the ASIS and to-be pictures for all the key parts of the enterprise from an IoT perspective. Now, how do you plan the actual construction and renovation work needed to get from that ASIS state to the to-be state?
That's the line. Define and maintain an architecture implementation and migration plan, APO 03.03. This is the plan for how you will transition from the current state architecture to the target state.
The building plan.
Essentially, it involves outlining the steps, defining the phases or increments of the transition, because you rarely do it all at once, right? And ensuring this plan integrates smoothly into your broader program and project planning. Communicating this roadmap effectively is noted as a level 4 activity, stressing its importance for successful execution.
Okay, so you have the vision, the detailed blueprints for each domain, and the transition plan. But what happens when, real-world pressures mean you might need to deviate from that perfect blueprint? Things change.
Good question. That's Manage Deviations and Exceptions, APO 3.04. This practice is crucial for maintaining the relevance and the integrity of the architecture over time.
How does it work?
It involves establishing clear criteria for when deviations are even allowed, monitoring whether projects and operations are actually complying with the architecture, having a formal process to authorize exceptions when necessary, and importantly, identifying the root causes when deviations happen frequently. Maybe the architecture needs updating, or maybe compliance is just poor.
So managing the exceptions.
Right. These activities are all typically at capability level 3. It's about finding that balance between the need for a standard blueprint and the practical realities of execution.
And finally, making sure that when people do build new things, they actually follow the blueprint.
Define Solution Development Guidance, APO 03.05. This practice provides the necessary rules, standards, and guidance for the teams who are developing or acquiring new solutions.
Instructions for the builders.
Pretty much. It takes those architecture principles from APO 03.01 and the detailed domain descriptions from APO 03.02 as inputs, and it produces guidance that is used directly in building domain, BAI. This ensures that new systems and applications are built to fit within the overall architectural landscape, not just bolted on randomly.
Okay, so APO 03 takes the strategic direction from APO 02 and translates it into a structured, detailed blueprint, the enterprise architecture covering the whole organization from an INT viewpoint. It plans the transition, manages exceptions to keep the blueprint relevant, and provides guidance to ensure everything new fits the overall design. The source also mentions components like architectural principles as a key policy type, and references external standards like TOGAF and NIST, indicating this isn't just an internal thing, but often leverages industry best practices.
Absolutely. It provides the necessary structure and guidelines for the BAI domain, the building and acquiring processes to happen efficiently and cohesively. Without good architecture, you end up with a real mess.
Right, the dreaded spaghetti architecture. Okay, moving on from the structure of the enterprise itself. We land on APO 04. Managed innovation. What's the purpose of this objective within the planning domain? Seems a bit different.
It is a bit different, but still crucial for planning. This is about actively identifying and encouraging innovation, whether that's in technology, in business processes, in how services are delivered specifically to help achieve enterprise objectives.
So planned innovation, not just random sparks of genius.
Exactly. It's about creating a structured approach to exploring new ideas and opportunities, rather than just, hoping innovation happens spontaneously. It's essential for staying competitive and relevant in the long run.
So how do you plan for innovation? Does it start with fostering the right environment?
It absolutely has to. Create an innovation culture, APO 04.01. The source highlights culture as a key component here, naturally. Activities involve identifying people who can be innovation champions, creating teams to explore new ideas, and involving staff across the organization in the innovation process. These activities are noted at capability level 3.
What feeds into that?
Inputs include things like risk appetite guidance from the EDM domain, because innovation often involves taking calculated risks, right?
True.
And things like recognition and reward programs from APOs 07, Human Resources, showing that encouraging innovation requires not just permission, but active cultural support and incentives. Example metrics focus on outcomes like employee awareness of opportunities, stakeholder satisfaction with new ideas, and the number of approved initiatives that actually came from innovative concepts.
That makes perfect sense. You need a culture that supports and rewards exploring new ideas, even if some of those ideas don't pan out eventually.
Yeah.
You also need to make sure innovation efforts are relevant to the business, right? Not just innovation for innovation's sake.
Definitely. Maintain an understanding of the enterprise environment, APO 04.02. This practice ensures that innovation isn't happening in a vacuum. It connects innovation efforts directly back to the business context, using inputs like the enterprise strategy and analyzing strengths and weaknesses, SWOT analysis.
And the outputs.
The output is identifying innovation opportunities that are specifically linked to driving business value. And this feeds back into the strategy objective, APO 02, to potentially inform future strategic direction.
So innovation informs strategy. And you also need to look outside the organization for new possibilities, I assume? New tech?
Monitor and scan the technology environment, APO 04.03. This is about actively looking outwards for emerging technologies and trends that could potentially be leveraged by the organization. It takes emerging technologies as an input and produces research analyses of innovation possibilities. And this output feeds into the solution design process, BAO 03, providing potential new technical avenues to explore when building things.
Okay, so understand the business needs, look outwards for new tech. Then you presumably get a stream of ideas coming in. How do you evaluate them?
Evaluate innovation ideas, APO 4.04. This practice sets up a formal process for assessing those potential innovation ideas. It involves defining clear criteria for evaluation, managing an idea funnel or pipeline, assessing the ideas against the criteria, and then proposing the most promising high-value ideas for further development or investigation.
Sorting the wheat from the chaff.
Pretty much. Activities 1, 3, 3 are at level 3, but proposing the high-value ideas is noted at level 4, indicating the need for a mature process to select the best opportunities. A simple metric is just the number of evaluated ideas tracking the activity level. And the output feeds into solution design, BAI03 as well.
And finally, for the idea that make the cut, supporting them to help them become reality.
Champion innovation initiatives, APO 04.05. This is about assigning specific individuals or teams to champion those selected innovation initiatives, clearly defining their roles and responsibilities in doing so, and managing expectations around the initiative's progress and potential impact. These activities are all at capability level 3. And the component section for APO 04 reinforces the importance of culture, ethics, and behavior, highlighting key elements related to building an ecosystem that encourages innovation and external scanning.
So APO 04 provides a structured approach to nurturing innovation within the planning framework. It's about creating the right culture, connecting innovation to business needs and external trends, systematically evaluating the ideas that come up, and providing the necessary support to bring the best ones forward. And it directly influences strategic direction, APO 02, and how new solutions get built, BAO 03.
Exactly. And pursuing strategic goals and innovation inevitably requires resources. You need to invest wisely.
Which leads us perfectly into APO 5, managed portfolio. What's the purpose here? Sounds like managing investments.
That's exactly it. This objective is all about making sure the organization is investing its I&T resources, time, money, people in the right initiatives, the ones that maximize value delivery back to the enterprise. It's about portfolio management for I&T, ensuring investments align with that strategy from APO 02 and yield the best possible return.
So job one is defining what value actually looks like for these investments. You can't manage it if you don't define it.
Spot on. Establish criteria for value assessment, APO 05.01. This practice defines how potential investments and initiatives will be evaluated for their business value. Activities include defining different types of portfolios or investments, maybe strategic projects versus operational improvements, and setting requirements for decision points or stage gates throughout the investment lifecycle. These activities are typically at capability level 2.
How do you measure if this is working?
A metric mentioned is the % of I&T initiatives that actually use these defined value management principles and practices. The output is a prioritization and ranking of I&T initiatives, which is then a key input for the next step, selecting programs.
Okay, so once you have the criteria for value, you evaluate and select the programs you actually want to invest in.
Evaluate and select programs, APO 5.02. This practice involves assessing investment proposals and their business cases against those defined criteria, proposing the highest value investments, and obtaining approval for funding. Activities are again at capability level 2. Metrics here are crucial for checking alignment. Things like the % of I&T investments traceable back to the enterprise strategy, and the % of investments decided based on a mix of factors like cost, strategic alignment, financial return, risk, and the type of benefit expected.
What goes into this evaluation?
Inputs include program business cases and that prioritization from APO 5.01. And the outputs include evaluations of the investment and services portfolios, and importantly, actions identified to improve future value delivery. These actions feed back into the governance domain focused on managed value, EDM Year 2.
So portfolio evaluation actually feeds back into improving the overall value management process right up at the governance level. Interesting loop. Then there's just formal authorization.
Authorized programs and portfolios, APO 5.03. This is the official green light step where investments get formally approved. The source lists this pretty straightforwardly as an activity at capability level 2.
Okay, authorization is done, but you have to manage these investments over time, right? Not just approve and forget.
Absolutely. Maintain portfolios, APO 05.04. This practice involves keeping track of all the approved programs, services, and assets throughout their entire life cycle. It means maintaining the portfolio records, working closely with program and service managers, and importantly, removing programs from the active portfolio when their planned value has been achieved, or maybe when they're clearly no longer delivering value. These activities are at capability level 3.
What informs this maintenance?
Inputs include feedback on program performance coming from budget management, APO6, operations, DSS, and building processes, BAI01, and updates to the service portfolio. Outputs include updated portfolios of programs, services, and assets, which feed into service agreements in APO9 and building processes in BAI01, and also communication about initiatives that are being retired.
And critically, maybe the hardest part, ensuring that the value you plan to achieve with these investments is actually realized in the end.
Manage Benefits Achievement, APO Winnow 5.05. This practice is all about actively ensuring that the planned benefits of I&T investments are actually delivered. It's not just about tracking costs, it's about tracking value.
How do you do that?
It involves clearly defining who is accountable for achieving the benefits, collecting reports on performance against those expected benefits, taking corrective action when benefits aren't materializing as planned, and actively working to optimize the value being delivered throughout the initiative's lifecycle.
That sounds quite involved.
It is. The activities here are noted at a high capability level, level 5, indicating the significant maturity required to truly manage benefit realization effectively. Metrics track the percent of initiatives where value management is continuous throughout the full lifecycle. Inputs include the program's budget and its benefits register. And the source references external guidance like ISO IE 308500 for this practice, highlighting its importance in corporate governance.
So APO5 is really the engine for strategic I&T investment. It ensures you pick the right initiatives based on defined value criteria, formally approve them, track them throughout their life, and crucially, actively manage for the realization of the planned benefits. And it's tightly linked to governance's focus on value, EDMA2, and feeds information into budget and building processes.
And speaking of budget, that's a natural segue.
It certainly is. Which brings us to APO6, manage budget and costs. Pretty self-explanatory purpose here, I imagine. Financial responsibility for I&T.
That's the core of it. This objective is about managing the finances related to I&T, making sure costs are tracked, allocated appropriately, and controlled effectively, providing transparency on spending, and ensuring that I&T operates within its financial constraints while still managing to support the enterprise goals. It's really about embedding financial discipline in I&T.
So it obviously starts with the budget itself.
Yes, you have practices like manage the I&T budget, APO 0C6.01, and create and maintain budgets, APO 06.03. This covers the core budgeting process, gathering requests, ranking initiatives based on priority, often informed by those portfolio decisions from APO 05.
Right, linking investment decisions to budget.
And allocating both financial and business resources accordingly. Activities like ranking and allocating are typically at capability level 2. Inputs include information about existing assets from asset management in BAI. The key output is the approved I&T budget and related communications about it. And that budget is an essential input for strategy refinement, APO 02, portfolio management, APO 5, human resource planning, APO 7, and building solutions, BAI 03.
So the budget acts as a fundamental resource plan that feeds into many other planning and execution activities downstream. How do you track the costs within that budget effectively?
Model and allocate costs, APO 06.04. This practice defines how I&T costs will be tracked and assigned to different services, projects, or perhaps business units. It's about cost transparency.
How does it work?
It involves defining a cost model, potentially linking it to a service catalog so you know the cost of delivering specific services. Designing the model to ensure transparency. Figuring out how to actually collect the necessary cost data. And planning how this information will be consolidated and presented back to stakeholders. Activities 1-3 are at level 2, 4-5 at level 3, indicating increasing maturity is needed for sophisticated cost modeling.
And metrics.
Metrics include things like the percent of business processes for which I&T costs are clearly defined and allocated. The outputs are internal procedures and communications about how costs are allocated.
And then actively managing those costs against the budget day to day.
Manage costs, APO 06.05. This is the ongoing monitoring and control of I&T expenditures against the plan. It involves getting approval for and communicating the cost model, establishing timelines for reporting costs, defining data collection methods, consolidating and presenting cost reports, and directing personnel to track data, report on costs, and importantly, analyze any deviations from the budget.
Finding the variances.
Exactly. Activities 1-2 are at level 2, 3-5 at level 3. Key metrics include percent variance from the budget and the percent of services that have defined cost baselines you can measure against. And an important output here is feedback on portfolio and program performance, specifically from a cost perspective. This feeds back into APO 05, portfolio management, and BAI 01, program management, closing a critical financial feedback loop.
So this highlights how financial management provides crucial performance data that directly informs investment decisions and project execution. And the components section for APO 06, it emphasizes the need for specific financial management skill, having a clear budgeting policy, and fostering a culture of transparency around budget, costs, benefits, and ensuring decisions are fact-based. Reinforces that good financial management isn't just about the numbers, is it?
Not at all. It's also about having the right people, the right policies, and the right culture to support that financial accountability within I&T planning and operations.
Okay, that covers money. Next up is APO 07, manage human resources, purpose, getting the right people in the right seats.
Essentially, yes. This objective is about ensuring that I&T has access to the right people with the necessary skills and motivation to achieve its objectives. It recognizes that human capital is a critical component of the I&T system and requires dedicated planning and management, just like finances or technology.
So it starts with simply ensuring you have enough people, staffing levels.
Acquire and maintain adequate and appropriate staffing, APO 07.01. This practice involves regularly assessing the staffing needs of the I&T organization, considering both internal staff and maybe external contractors, and ensuring that there are enough personnel to meet those needs based on the planned work.
What goes into that?
Activities include maintaining an inventory of current human resources and understanding the demand for those resources based on planned activities, like projects from the portfolio. These are typically at capability level 2. Inputs include the I&T budget from APO 06, because staffing levels are obviously tied to budget, and the approved resources plan, coming from portfolio management and governance. Metrics include identifying staffing shortfalls or missing skills and tracking how staff time is actually utilized on assignments or projects.
And once you have the people, ensuring they have the necessary skills to do the work. That sounds crucial.
Maintain the skills and competencies of personnel, APO 7.03. This is a really critical practice. It involves defining the specific skills and competencies required for different roles and activities within I&T, actively managing those skills across the organization, and verifying that personnel actually possess the needed skills.
How do you manage skills?
Activities include identifying required skills and analyzing the gap between required skills and current capabilities, both noted at level 2. The source references frameworks like SFIA, the skills framework for the information age here, indicating the use of external standards for defining IT skills is common.
What about inputs and outputs?
Inputs and outputs here can seem a bit circular, like skills and competencies matrix feeding into the practice that maintains that matrix, and also generating skill development plans. This really just shows it's a continuous internal management loop. Assess skills, plan development, update records, repeat. Metrics include the percent of staff with required skills and tracking identified skill shortfalls. The outputs feed into defining roles back in APO 11 and processes for building solutions, BAI, and delivering services, DSS.
Okay, so assess needs, check capabilities, plan development for skills. What about ensuring people perform well and are motivated?
Manage personnel performance, APO 07.04. This involves establishing clear performance goals and objectives for personnel, aligned with I&T and business goals, developing and implementing programs for reward and recognition to motivate staff, and putting in place a system for performance management and appraisal. These activities are generally at capability level 2. An input is the enterprise's overall reward system approach, coming from the governance domain, EDM 01.
Aligning IT performance management with the company's approach and tracking how those valuable human resources are being used across everything.
Plan and track the usage of IT and business human resources, APO 07.05. This practice involves monitoring and recording how human resources are actually utilized across different projects, services, and operational activities.
Where does the info come from?
Inputs include budget allocations from APO 6, inventories of personnel, and resource requirements identified in other planning or building activities, like in BAI 01. Outputs include detailed resource utilization records, analyses of any resourcing shortfalls, communication about resourcing strategies, which feeds up into governance, and feedback on how effectively resources are allocated and used, also feeding into governance. This provides crucial data for future planning and governance oversight.
This seems like a key input for portfolio management, APO 5, and project execution, BAI 01, knowing if you actually have the people available that your plans depend on.
Absolutely crucial.
What about managing external personnel like contractors or consultants? Different challenges there.
Manage contractor resources, APO 07.06. This practice focuses specifically on those challenges. It involves defining the organization's approach to using contractors, obtaining commitments from them, advising internal teams on how to effectively monitor contractor work, clearly defining contractor roles and responsibilities, reviewing their work and approving payments, establishing formal contracts, and conducting periodic reviews of agreements and, importantly, their access rights.
Access rights that links to security.
It does. Activities 1 through 6 are at level 3, but reviewing agreements and access rights are noted at level 4, highlighting the need for careful oversight of external party access. And an input is allocated access rights from operational security, DSSR 6, showing that direct link between HR management of contractors and security controls.
This reinforces that managing people, whether they're internal or external, is directly tied into security and operational processes. And the components for APO 07 highlight SFIA again for skills, but also emphasize cultural elements related to user behavior, things like information usage, security, privacy awareness, and having zero tolerance for unethical behaviors. It underlines that human resources management isn't just about hiring and firing. It includes fostering the right ethical and security-conscious culture.
Yes, exactly. People are the engine, and managing them effectively, including their skills, their performance, and their adherence to policies and ethical standards, is fundamental to the success of all INT planning and operations.
Okay, that covers the crucial resource of people. Now, shifting focus to managing the relationships with the people INT serves. APO 8, Managed Relationships. Purpose: keeping stakeholders happy.
That's a big part of it, yes. This objective is about building and maintaining strong, positive relationships with business stakeholders and any other parties INT interacts with. Ultimately, the aim is achieving INT-related stakeholder satisfaction. It's about ensuring INT is seen as a trusted partner, really understanding their needs, and managing expectations effectively.
So it must start with really listening to the business, understanding them.
Understand business expectations, APO 08.01. This involves actively seeking to understand the current business challenges, the strategic objectives, and the specific expectations that stakeholders have for INT.
How does this link to other areas?
Interestingly, example metrics from the source listed here include things like the level of business executive awareness of INT innovation possibilities, or the number of approved initiatives coming from innovative ideas metrics we also saw linked to innovation and value. It demonstrates that understanding expectations is tied to identifying opportunities for INT to deliver value and supporting innovation. The core activity is simply understanding those issues, objectives, and expectations.
Okay, so listen first. Then take those expectations and try to align INT's plans and capabilities accordingly.
Align INT strategy with business expectations and identify opportunities, APO 8.02. This practice is about ensuring that the INT strategy, its capabilities, and its service offerings are structured to effectively meet those business expectations and position INT as a value-add partner, not just a cost center.
Metrics for this.
Example metrics gauge the inclusion of technology opportunities in investment proposals and measure business stakeholder satisfaction with INT. And here is a really insightful connection. An input here is root causes of quality delivery failures coming from places like APO 09, APO 11, the BAI domain, and the MEA domain.
Failures impact relationships. Seems obvious, but good to see it formalized.
It shows that failures in delivering quality services or solutions directly damage relationships and make it much harder to align INT strategy with business expectations, simply because trust gets eroded. It's a powerful feedback loop.
Definitely. Poor execution undermines strategic alignment because trust is gone. How do you maintain the relationship on an ongoing basis, day to day?
Manage business relationship APO 8.03. This involves the ongoing, active management of those relationships. Activities include assigning specific relationship owners within INT, establishing clear and preferred channels for communication with business stakeholders, ensuring that INT takes ownership and communicates effectively during major incidents or events impacting the business, and maintaining a comprehensive end-to-end communication plan. Activities 1 through 3 are at level 2. Activity 4 is at level 3 capability.
And managing all the different communication channels and reporting needs that come with relationships.
Manage communication and reporting, APO 8.04. This practice defines the standards and processes for how information flows from INT to stakeholders. It includes defining a formal communication plan, establishing standard formats and cadences for reporting, like performance reports, project status updates, managing official communications, and even managing external relations. Activities are typically at capability level 3.
What kind of info flows through here?
Inputs include important communications like risk impact information from APO 12 and DSS 04 and notifications about planned maintenance downtime from VA 09. It shows how crucial risk and operational information needs to be disseminated effectively through these established relationship channels.
So relationship management acts as the conduit for communicating crucial information out. And finally, using feedback gathered through these relationships to actually improve INT, closing the loop.
Provide input to continual improvement APO 08.05. This practice ensures that feedback received from relationship management activities, such as results from quality monitoring, which comes from APO 9, APO 11 BAI, is captured systematically and used to identify potential improvement projects. The output is the definition of these potential projects, which can then feed back into the strategy assessment process, APO 02, or perhaps portfolio management, APO 05.
Okay, so APO 8 is vital for ensuring INT is genuinely connected to the business it serves. It focuses on understanding needs, aligning strategy, maintaining the partnership through active communication and reporting, and using stakeholder feedback as a direct input for continuous improvement. It really shows that relationships aren't just soft skills. They're a critical component of effective INT management, directly impacted by things like quality delivery and influencing strategic alignment.
Absolutely. And those relationships often need to be formalized, especially around service delivery, which involves formal agreements.
Leading us directly to APO 9, manage service agreements. Purpose, setting expectations formally.
That's the heart of it. This objective is about formalizing the understanding between INT and the business, or maybe external customers, regarding the services being delivered. It's all about establishing transparency, defining expectations clearly, setting measurable service levels, and ensuring accountability for service delivery performance against those levels.
So it starts with actually defining the terms of the agreement. What's in the contract?
Define service agreements, APO 09.01. This practice involves analyzing the requirements for INT services from the business perspective, and then defining and formally agreeing on the terms of service agreements, things like service level agreements or SLAs with the business owners. Activities are typically at capability level 2.
What drives the need for these?
Inputs include things like identified gaps in IT services needed by the business, which might come from APO 02, the strategy domain. This shows that strategic gaps identified earlier can necessitate creating new or updated service agreements. Metrics track things like the number of business processes that don't have defined agreements and the percent of live services that are covered by agreements, highlighting the goal of comprehensive coverage. And the source references several external standards here, like ISO AEC 20000 and ITEL, indicating these are widely accepted best practices.
Okay, so once defined, you need to manage those agreements throughout their life. Keep them relevant.
Manage service agreements, APO 09.02. This practice involves the ongoing management of those service agreements. It includes defining the structure and content of the agreements clearly, formally defining, agreeing on, and documenting the specific terms like availability targets, response times, capacity levels, etc., and obtaining formal sign-off from both INT and the relevant business stakeholders. These activities are typically at capability level 3.
What feeds into managing these?
Inputs include updated portfolios from APOs 05 and BAI 01 because your services portfolio needs to align with agreements and approved resources plans, from governance, strategy, and human resources, linking the service commitments you make to the resources and investments you actually have available.
And a critical part of managing agreements must be monitoring performance against the agreed levels. Are we meeting the targets?
Monitor service levels APO 09.04. This is a central practice, absolutely. It's where you track INT's actual performance against the defined service levels in the agreements.
What does that involve?
It involves monitoring and tracking performance metrics continuously, identifying the specific needs of different stakeholders for reporting on service levels, producing those reports clearly and regularly, and importantly, analyzing the root causes of incidents and service requests that impact service levels. Why did we fail to meet the target? Activities 1-3 are at level 3, but analyzing incidents and requests for their impact on service is noted at a high capability level, level 5, reflecting the complexity and importance of sophisticated performance analysis.
What kind of metrics?
Metrics include traditional IT metrics like mean time between incidents, mean time to repair, and the number or percent of incidents causing business disruption. Inputs include results from quality monitoring, from APO 11, APO 8, BAIO 7, and status reports on incident and request fulfillment coming directly from operations in DSS 02.
And the outputs seem really important here.
They are crucial. Outputs include updated SLAs, which feed into reviews, identified root causes of quality delivery failures, feeding back into relationships in APO8, quality in AP11, building processes in BAI, and monitoring assessment in MEA, and results of quality reviews and audits, feeding into relationships, reviews, and building processes. This practice really acts as a key monitoring hub, linking actual service performance back to quality, relationships, and operational processes.
That practice is clearly a major nexus for feedback and improvement across the board. And finally, you need to periodically review the agreements themselves. Make sure they're still fit for purpose.
Review service agreements and contracts, APO 9.05. This involves periodically checking the service agreements and any underlying contracts, like with suppliers who support the service, to ensure they are still relevant, accurately reflect current business needs, and are actually being met.
What informs these reviews?
Inputs include updated SLAs, coming from that monitoring practice, APO 09.04, results of quality of service monitoring, including direct customer feedback collected via APO 11, and the results of quality reviews and audits from APO 11, APO 8, BAI 07. The output is updated SLAs, feeding back into the internal process to keep them current.
Okay, so APO 09 formalizes the relationship with the business by defining clear expectations and agreements, manages those agreements over time, rigorously monitors performance against the agreed levels, and uses that monitoring data as a powerful driver for improvement in both the services themselves and the agreements that define them. And it relies heavily on inputs from quality management, relationship management, and operational processes.
Exactly. And often, delivering those agreed-upon services involves relying on external parties, not just internal teams.
Which seamlessly leads us to APO 10, manage suppliers, purpose, managing those third parties effectively.
Precisely. This objective is about managing third-party service delivery. It could be software vendors, cloud providers, outsourcers, to ensure that these external providers contribute value, meet the requirements set for them, and integrate seamlessly with internal I&T processes. It's about effectively dealing with vendors, partners, and other suppliers to minimize risk and maximize value.
So the first step is finding and evaluating potential suppliers, deciding who to work with.
Identify and evaluate supplier relationships and contracts, APO 10.01. This practice involves scanning the market to identify potential partners or vendors, establishing and maintaining clear criteria for evaluating suppliers, defining specific evaluation criteria for different needs, example, security requirements versus cost, developing profiles of potential suppliers, and formally evaluating them against the criteria.
How mature does this need to be?
Activities 1 to 4 are at level 3, but the actual evaluation of suppliers is noted at a high capability level, level 5. This suggests that mature organizations have highly sophisticated and rigorous supplier evaluation processes, not just informal checks. Metrics include tracking how well existing suppliers meet evaluation criteria and the availability of alternative suppliers, your Plan B. The source mentions a vendor catalog as both an input and output here, implying that maintaining an up-to-date list of potential and approved suppliers is part of this process. The output vendor catalog is an input for building processes, BAI 02.
Okay, so once evaluated, you need a formal process to select the right one for a specific need.
Select vendors, APO 10.02. This practice focuses on the formal process of choosing suppliers, often through procurement. It involves receiving input like high-level acquisition or development plans from the building domain, BAI, preparing and sending out formal requests for information, RFIs, or requests for proposals, RFPs, evaluating the responses received, and making a final decision based on those evaluations.
Seems like a standard procurement flow.
It is, and like the previous practice, inputs and outputs here include RFIs, RFPs, and their evaluations, suggesting a multi-step internal process is expected. Metrics include tracking gaps between supplier offerings and the requirements stated in the RFP. The decision results of vendor evaluations are important outputs, feeding into communication processes, APO1, and building processes, BAI 02.
So a structured and formal procurement process. What about managing the relationship after a supplier is selected and contracted? It's not just sign and forget.
Definitely not. Manage supplier relationships, APO 10.03. This is the ongoing management of the relationship once the contract is signed. Activities include assigning specific relationship owners within I&T for key suppliers, defining and specifying how communication and performance reviews will happen, and formally agreeing on, managing, maintaining, and renewing the contracts with suppliers over time. These activities are all typically at capability level 3.
What informs this?
Inputs include approved acquisition plans from BAI View 3. Metrics focus on the health and formality of the relationship. Things like the percent of third-party suppliers with contracts that clearly define control requirements, the number of formal disputes that arise, the frequency of supplier review meetings, and the percent of disputes resolved amicably.
And a significant part of working with any external party is managing the risks they might introduce.
Yeah.
That sounds critical for suppliers.
Manage supplier risk, APO 10.04. This practice is absolutely critical and links directly back to enterprise risk management, APO 12. It involves systematically identifying risks related to working with suppliers. Could be anything from data breaches caused by a third party, a key supplier going out of business, poor service delivery impacting your own customers. Lots of things. So you'd identify them, classify them, assess their likelihood and potential impact. Then you develop strategies to mitigate those risks, maybe through contractual clauses, requiring audits, having alternative sourcing options. Then you implement controls to reduce the risk, monitor supplier risk on an ongoing basis, manage incidents or problems caused by suppliers, and formally assess supplier performance specifically from a risk perspective.
A comprehensive risk focus.
Yes, and activities 1 to 6 are at level 3, but assessing supplier performance from a risk lens is noted at level 4. Outputs include identified vendor delivery risk, which feeds into the overall I&T risk profile in APO 12, and the results of third-party risk assessments, which feed into enterprise risk management in EDM 03 and assurance processes in MEA 02. This clearly shows how supplier management has a direct and significant impact on broader organizational risk. And the components for APO 10 include culture, ethics, and behavior, emphasizing cultural elements around building a collaborative ecosystem of vendors and the importance of management setting the right tone for how suppliers are treated and managed.
So APO 10 covers the entire life cycle of supplier engagement, doesn't it? From finding and evaluating them through formal selection, ongoing relationship management, and crucially, integrating the management of supplier-related risks right into the overall enterprise risk picture. It's absolutely essential for any organization that relies significantly on external service providers.
Indeed. Now, moving from managing external parties to ensuring the quality of both internal and external output.
That takes us to APO 11, managed quality. Purpose, making sure things work well and meet standards.
That's the essence of it. Ensuring that I&T services, solutions, and processes consistently meet defined quality requirements and standards. This objective focuses on embedding quality thinking and practices into all I&T activities, right from the planning stage onwards, to ensure reliable and effective outcomes, not just fixing problems after they happen.
So proactive quality. It probably starts with setting up a system for quality, a framework.
Establish a quality management system, QMS, AP 11.01. This involves defining and implementing the overall framework for managing quality within I&T. Activities include ensuring a standard approach to quality across the organization, defining roles, tasks, and decision rights specifically for quality management, getting input on quality requirements and expectations from stakeholders, defining specific metrics and methods for measuring quality, planning how quality performance will be reported and communicated, and implementing regular quality reviews.
Seems quite structured.
It is. Activities 1 to 2 are at level 3, but 3 to 6, dealing with requirements, metrics, reporting, and reviews, are at level 4, indicating that defining the measurement and review processes requires greater maturity. Inputs can include an enterprise-wide quality system if one exists outside I&T. Outputs include defining QMS roles responsibilities, which feed back into APO 1 organizational setup, and creating quality management plans, which become inputs for data management in APO 14, building solutions in BAI, and operational processes.
Okay, so once the system, the QMS, is established, you need to define the specific rules and standards for quality within that system.
Define quality standards, practices, and procedures, APO 11.03. Now, the source actually lists 2 practices with the same name, but they focus on slightly different aspects.
Yeah.
The first version is about defining the standards themselves.
Setting the bar.
Exactly. It involves defining specific quality goals and metrics, evaluating if they are smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and communicating proposed changes to these standards. Activities 1 and 2 are at level 2, activity 3 at level 3. Inputs can include available quality certifications like ISO 9001 and industry best practices. The key output is quality management standards, which serve as inputs for quality-related activities across all domains, APO, BAI, DSS, MEA.
And the second practice with that name.
The second version of APO 11.03 focuses more on managing and integrating these defined standards into key I&T processes and solutions. It's about embedding quality management activities into workflows, ensuring that quality requirements are actually met during development or operation, managing instances of noncompliance, tracking quality performance and trends over time, and monitoring continuous improvement efforts related to quality. Activities 1 to 4 are at level 3. A key output here is identifying root causes of quality delivery failures, which, as we've seen, feeds back into relationship management, APO8, service agreements, APO9, building solutions, BAIO7, and monitoring assessment, MEA.
That feedback loop on quality failures seems really crucial for learning and preventing recurrence. What about checking performance against those standards, the monitoring aspect of quality?
Perform quality monitoring, control, and reviews, APO 11.04. This practice is about actively monitoring and assessing quality performance against the defined standards. It involves monitoring quality results continuously, defining and planning specific measurements and tests, and using the information gathered for improvement purposes. Activities are typically at capability level 3.
What data do you use for this?
Inputs include things like quality assurance plans and the results of quality reviews or testing coming from the building domain, BAII03, and the outputs are significant. Results of quality monitoring, feeding into relationships, service agreements, and building processes, defining process quality of service goals and metrics, which can feed into setting standards across all domains, and the result of quality reviews and audits, again feeding into relationships, service agreements, and building processes. This practice acts as a central point for generating and distributing quality performance data throughout the framework.
So monitoring quality performance feeds back directly into service agreements and drives improvement cycles.
Yeah.
And how do you ensure quality isn't static, but continuously improving over time?
Maintain continuous improvement, APO 11.05. This practice is about fostering an ongoing effort to enhance the QMS itself and the quality practices across INT. An input is quality review benchmark results from across the framework, allowing comparison against peers or best practices, and identifying areas for improvement. An output is examples of good practice identified internally that can be shared across all domains to lift overall quality. And the source references external guidance like the PMBOK guide section on managed quality under the monitoring practice, APO 11.04, indicating external methods can definitely support these internal quality practices.
Okay, so APO 11 provides the foundational system, QMS, defines the standards, embeds quality into processes, monitors performance against those standards, and drives continuous improvement. It's really about building quality into INT from the ground up, aiming for reliability and effectiveness, not just reacting to problems.
And quality, or lack thereof, is intimately linked with the potential for things to go wrong with risks.
Indeed, which brings us squarely to APO 12. Managed risk. Purpose. Handling potential problems proactively.
That's exactly it. This objective is about identifying, analyzing, and responding to INT-related risks. And crucially, integrating the management of these specific INT risks into the broader enterprise risk management framework. It's about proactively understanding potential problems and making informed decisions about how to handle them.
So logically, the first step is finding the risks. What could go wrong?
Identify and evaluate INT-related risk, APO 12.01. This practice involves scoping the specific areas you want to analyze for risk and then building or updating risk scenarios, thinking about how potential threats and vulnerabilities could combine to lead to negative outcomes for the business. Activities are typically at capability level 3.
Where do ideas for risks come from?
Inputs include emerging risk issues and factors identified through monitoring the management system itself, APO 01, or assessing the strategic environment, APO 02. This shows that changes in your foundational setup or your strategy can introduce new risks you need to consider. Metrics track the number of identified INT risk scenarios and, importantly, how recently these scenarios have been updated, highlighting the need for ongoing risk identification, not just a one-time exercise.
Okay, so once potential risks are identified, you need to analyze them in more detail, understand them better.
Analyze risk, APO 12.02. This practice develops a more substantiated understanding of the nature and extent of those identified INT risks. It involves defining the scope of the analysis more clearly. What exactly are we looking at? Building or updating the risk scenarios with more detail, and determining the likelihood of a risk occurring and the potential impact on the business if it does. These activities are also at capability level 3.
What helps with this analysis?
Inputs include things like business impact analyses, BIAs, from continuity management, DSS-04, which assess the impact of disruptions on critical processes, and evaluations of potential threats coming from security operations in DSS-05. Key outputs are the risk analysis results. These results are critical inputs for foundational planning elements like the management system design, APO-01, and strategy definition, APO-2. It also generates specific INT risk scenarios and documentation about the scope of the analysis effort. Risk analysis also feeds into building solutions, BAI-01, BAI-11, and up to enterprise risk management, EDM-03.
So risk analysis directly informs strategy and how you build things you plan and build differently when you understand the potential risks involved. You also need a consolidated view of all the identified risks across INT, presumably.
Maintain a risk profile, APO 12.03. This practice involves keeping an aggregated, consolidated view of all identified INT risks. It's the big picture of INT risk. Activities include inventorying key business processes and understanding their dependencies on INT, determining which INT services are most essential to the business, and defining the structure and content of the risk profile itself. These activities are typically at capability level 2.
What feeds into this profile?
Inputs include identified vendor delivery risk, coming directly from APO 10, showing that supplier risks feed into the overall INT risk picture, and more evaluations of potential threats from DSSO 5. The main output is the aggregated risk profile, which should include the status of actions being taken to manage those risks. This profile is a crucial input for strategy assessment, APO-02, and directs risk management oversight at the governance level, EDM-03. Metrics track the completeness of the profile and how many key business processes are included in the risk assessment.
So supplier risk and threat intelligence feed into the overall risk picture, which then informs high-level strategy and governance decisions. And communicating this risk information effectively to stakeholders, that must be key.
Articulate risk, APO 12.04. This practice ensures that information about INT risks is effectively communicated to relevant stakeholders, which definitely includes senior management and potentially the board. It involves defining the structure, content, and frequency of risk reporting, maintaining principles for clear and understandable risk communication, and examining specific reporting requirements for different audiences. Activities are at capability level 3.
What information is communicated?
Inputs include the risk analysis reports and the aggregated risk profile itself, as well as results from third-party risk assessments from APO 10 EDM-03, and sometimes information about opportunities where the business might choose to accept greater risk, coming from EDM-03. This practice is clearly a key link between INT risk management, enterprise governance, supplier management, and reporting.
Okay, communication is vital. What about planning how to actually deal with the risks you've identified, analyzed, and profiled? The response plan.
Define a risk management action portfolio, APO 12.05. This practice involves planning the specific actions or initiatives that will be undertaken to respond to the identified risks. The response could be to mitigate the risk, reduce likelihood or impact, transfer it like with insurance or outsourcing, avoid it, stop doing the risky activity, or consciously accept it if the cost of mitigation outweighs the potential impact. The output is essentially project proposals for reducing risk, which can feed into strategy assessment, APO-02, and specifically into the security risk treatment plan, APO-13.
So risk planning directly informs strategic initiatives and, very importantly, security planning. And finally, implementing those planned responses, taking action.
Respond to risk, APO 12.06. This practice is about executing the planned risk responses. It involves implementing the chosen actions, managing any necessary remedial actions, like fixing vulnerabilities identified, monitoring and evaluating whether the actions are actually effective in reducing risk, and reporting on the results. Activities are at capability level 3.
What triggers these responses?
Inputs can include directions for remedial actions coming down from the governance domain, EDM-03. The outputs are really significant. Risk impact communication, feeding back into communication with stakeholders in APO-1, APO-08, and into continuity management in DSSO-4, identifying risk-related root causes, feeding into various operational and monitoring objectives like DSSO-2, DSSO-3, DSSO-4, MEA-04, helping prevent recurrence, and generating risk-related incident response plans, feeding directly into incident management in DSSO-2. This practice really closes the loop, connecting risk planning and response directly to communication, operational processes, root cause analysis, and incident handling. And the components for APO-12 emphasize things like having a transparent and participatory risk culture, strong management support for risk management, open communication about risks, and crucially, establishing business ownership of INT risk, not just IT ownership. It references frameworks like COSO, EAR, ISF, and NIST SP 837.
APO-12 is clearly a cornerstone objective within this whole APO domain, embedding risk thinking throughout the planning and organizing process. It links tightly to strategy, architecture, supplier management, security, data management, and feeds critical information into operational and governance domains. It really underscores that managing INT risk isn't just an IT function. It's a fundamental enterprise-wide concern requiring careful planning and strong cultural support.
Absolutely. And perhaps the most visible and often most critical type of risk in the INT world is related to security.
Which brings us directly to APO 13, managed security. Purpose: keeping the bad guys out and the data safe.
That's a big part of it, yes. Ensuring the security of enterprise information and the INT assets that handle it. This objective focuses on establishing the necessary framework, policies, and plans to protect the organization's digital assets from various threats, internal and external, malicious or accidental, and integrating security into the overall INT planning and management system from the start.
So, like quality and risk, it probably starts with setting up the framework for security, an overarching system.
Establish and maintain an Information Security Management System, ISMS, APO 13.01. This practice involves defining, implementing, and maintaining the overall system for managing information security across the enterprise. Activities include defining the ISMS itself, establishing the overarching information security policy, which is a key component, defining specific security processes and procedures, identifying the resources needed for security, people, technology, and assigning roles and responsibilities for security activities. Activities are typically at capability level 3.
Where does this come from?
An input can be the broader enterprise security approach, if one exists. Outputs are the ISMS scope statement, which feeds into defining roles and responsibilities back in APO 1 and defining security services in DSS 06, and the ISMS policy itself. Metrics track things like the % of documented security procedures and the % of policies that are clearly linked back to the ISMS, showing the formality and completeness of the system. And the source references major standards like ISO or AC 27001 and 27002 here, which provide detailed guidance on establishing an ISMS.
Okay, so once the ISMS framework is in place, you need a specific plan to deal with the security risks that were identified back in APO 12.
Define and manage an Information Security and Privacy Risk Treatment Plan, APO 13.02. This practice focuses specifically on planning the responses to those identified information security and privacy risks. It involves identifying and evaluating different options for treating those risks. For example, implementing specific technical controls, security awareness training, changing a process, developing and implementing the actual treatment plans, ensuring these plans are integrated into other processes like solution development or operational procedures, and managing any risks related to the treatment process itself. Activities are typically at capability level 3.
Where does this plan come from?
A key input is those project proposals for reducing risk that came directly from the general risk management process in APO 12.05. And the output is the Information Security Risk Treatment Plan. And this is a truly foundational document. According to the source material, it is listed as a critical input for all other management domains, APO, BAI, DSS, MEA, and all governance objectives, EDM.
Wow, hang on. That's incredibly significant. The Security Risk Treatment Plan, which comes out of APO 13, is an input that impacts literally every other INT management and governance activity in this framework.
That's what the mapping suggests. It highlights just how central and pervasive security considerations need to be across the entire enterprise INT landscape. The plan for how you treat security risks informs everything else.
That really elevates the importance of this practice. How do you ensure this ISMS and the resulting plans are actually working effectively over time? Monitoring.
Monitor and review the Information Security Management System, ISMS, APO 13.03. This practice involves ongoing oversight of the ISMS to ensure its continued suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. Activities include monitoring and reviewing the ISMS's performance against objectives, conducting internal or external audits of the ISMS, undertaking formal management reviews of the security posture and ISMS effectiveness, recording actions taken and security events that occur, and providing input for maintaining and improving the ISMS and its associated plans.
What's the maturity level here?
Activities 1 through 4 are noted at capability level 4, and providing input for maintenance is at level 5. This reflects the high maturity expected in monitoring and improving the core security system. Metrics track the number of ISMS audits and management reviews conducted. The source references NIST SP 837 here, which deals with risk management frameworks. And the components for APO 13 highlight the information security policy as a key policy component and reinforce the link back to organizational structure and roles via the ISMS scope statement feeding into APO 11.
Okay, so APO 13 establishes the Fundamental Security Framework, the ISMS, translates general risk planning from APO 12 into a specific, actionable plan for addressing security and privacy risks, a plan which impacts everything else, and ensures the ongoing effectiveness of that framework through continuous monitoring, review, and improvement. That security risk treatment plan is clearly a pivotal output from the entire APO domain.
It really is. And finally, the APO domain concludes its planning and organizing journey by focusing explicitly on the subject of much of this planning and protection, the information itself, the data.
Which brings us to the last one, APO 14, Managed Data. Purpose: looking after the data as an asset.
Exactly, ensuring effective and efficient management of enterprise data across its entire lifecycle, from creation to disposal. This objective is about recognizing data as a critical enterprise asset and putting in place the necessary plans, processes, and controls to manage its quality, security, privacy, usability, and availability effectively.
So, like the others, it probably starts with an overall plan or strategy for how data will be handled.
Define a data management strategy, APO 14.01. This practice involves establishing the overall strategy for how the enterprise will manage its data assets. Activities include defining requirements for data management, what do we need data for, identifying key stakeholders and their roles in data governance, defining the different phases of the data lifecycle, creation, storage, use, archive, disposal, identifying critical data elements that require special attention, and defining control objectives for data management. Activities are typically at capability level 3.
What informs this data strategy?
Inputs include foundational elements like data classification guidelines coming from APO 01 and APO 03 and baseline architecture definitions from APO 03. The output is the data management strategy itself, which is a crucial input for later APO 14 practices like data quality, APO 14.04, but also for building solutions BAI 03, operational security, DSS 06, and backup restore planning, APO 14.0. A metric is the percent of stakeholders who formally sign off on the strategy, indicating buy-in is considered key.
So the data strategy relies heavily on those upfront classifications defined way back in APO 01 and the architecture blueprint from APO 03. What about defining the common language we use when talking about data? Avoiding confusion.
Establish a business glossary, APO 14.02. This practice is essential for ensuring a common understanding of key business terms and data definitions across the entire enterprise. Avoid situations where different departments use the same term to mean different things.
How do you build it?
It involves identifying stakeholders who need to agree on definitions, establishing a process for defining and managing terms, applying those standard terms consistently in documentation and systems, and integrating the glossary into relevant systems or documentation so people can easily access it. Activities 1 to 5 are at level 3, but activity 6, actually integrating it, is at level 4, highlighting the importance of embedding consistent terminology, not just defining it. Inputs include architecture principles from APO 03, reinforcing that data definitions should align with overall architectural guidance. The output is the business glossary, which is an input for metadata management at APO 14.03, and building solutions, BAI AO2. A metric tracks the percent of business terms that have an agreed, defined meaning. The source references frameworks like the CMMI data management maturity model here.
A common language for data is incredibly important for preventing misinterpretation and errors down the line, and managing data about the data, metadata.
Establish the processes and infrastructure for metadata management, APO 14.03. Metadata is data information about its definition, source, format, usage rules, quality level, etc. This practice is about setting up the systems and processes to manage this critical metadata effectively.
What's involved?
Activities include defining the scope and level of detail needed for metadata and establishing or maintaining a logical model for how metadata is structured and stored. These activities are typically at capability level 3. Inputs include the information architecture model from APO 3 and any existing metadata documentation. The output is updated metadata documentation, which feeds back into architecture, APO 3, showing a close, iterative relationship. A metric is the percent of critical data elements that have their required metadata defined.
Okay, so data strategy, common terms, glossary, and data about data, metadata, all build on the foundational APO 01 guidelines and the APO 03 architecture. Now, what about ensuring the data itself is actually high quality, accurate, complete, timely, reliable?
Define a data quality strategy, APO 14.04. This involves establishing and maintaining the specific strategy for ensuring data quality across the enterprise. Activities include anchoring data quality policies and processes within the organization, developing a plan for sequencing data quality activities, where do we start, monitoring those plans, and systematically collecting data quality reports. Activities 1 to 4 are at level 3, while 5, 6, monitoring and collection, are at level 4, showing increasing maturity and proactively managing the strategy.
What informs the quality strategy?
Inputs include the overall data management strategy, APO 14.01, data integrity procedures, perhaps defined back in APO 1, and data security control guidelines, also from APO 11. This links data quality directly to the broader data strategy and foundational controls. The output is the data quality strategy, which then feeds into the specific processes for assessing and cleansing data quality. APO 14.05, APO 14.06, APO 14.07. A metric is simply the number of identified data quality issues.
So the data quality strategy is a specific, actionable part of the overall data management strategy. How do you actually assess that quality in practice? Measure it.
There are 2 linked practices here. Establish data profiling methodologies, processes, and tools, APO 14.05, and ensure a data quality assessment approach, APO 14.06. APO 14.05 is about setting up how you will analyze data to understand its characteristics and identify quality issues, defining the methodologies, selecting the tools, setting up the processes. APO 14.06 is about actually performing those assessments using the defined approach.
What does performing the assessment entail?
Activities in APO 14.06 include conducting the data quality assessments, including recommendations for remediation when issues are found, assessing the quality against predefined thresholds or rules, generating reports on the quality levels, and reviewing and improving the assessment processes themselves over time. Activities 1 to 4 are at level 4. Activity 5, Review Improve, is at level 5, emphasizing the need for mature, repeatable assessment processes. Inputs include the data quality strategy, APO 14.04, and quality management plans from APO 11. Outputs include the results of the data quality assessments. Metrics track the number of issues identified and the number of assessment results that include concrete recommendations for fixing them.
Okay, assessment tells you where the problems are. How do you plan to actually fix them, cleanse the data?
Define the data cleansing approach, APO 14.07. This practice defines the methods, rules, and processes for correcting or cleansing data quality issues that were identified during assessment. The input is the data quality strategy, APO 14.04, and an interesting output is data quality requirements, which can feed into service agreements, APO 09. Meaning your service agreements, say with a data provider or even an internal department, can include specific requirements for the quality level of the data being delivered or exchanged. Data quality becomes a contractual or agreed item.
That's a very practical outcome. Data quality influencing formal agreements. What about managing data over its entire life, from cradle to grave?
Manage the life cycle of data assets, APO 14.08. This practice covers managing data from the moment it's created or captured, through its active use, periods of retention, archiving, and its eventual secure disposal. Input is data security and control guidelines from APO 1, APO 14, BAI, DSS, reinforcing that security and control are needed throughout the entire life cycle, not just when it's actively used. The output is the data archive itself, feeding into archiving processes.
And archiving and retention need to follow specific rules, right? Legal holds, regulations.
Support data archiving and retention, APO 14.09. This ensures that historical data is stored appropriately according to legal requirements, regulatory mandates, and business retention policies. Input is retention requirements, often derived from legal compliance or operational business process controls in DSS 06, linking data archiving directly to compliance and operational needs. Output is the data archive itself for internal use. Metrics track the success rate of transfers to the archive and compliance with maintenance requirements for the archive, like ensuring readability over time.
And finally, maybe most fundamentally for operations, ensuring data availability through backups, disaster recovery planning.
Manage data backup and restore arrangements, APO 14.0. This critical practice ensures that data is regularly backed up according to defined schedules and policies, and that processes are in place and tested to restore data effectively if needed due to system failure, corruption, or disaster. Inputs include data security and control guidelines from APO 01, etc., and the overall data management strategy, APO 014.01. Outputs are the backup test plan and the backup plan itself, which are crucial inputs for operational continuity management down in DSS 04.
Wow. Okay, APO 14 is incredibly detailed about managing data itself, really underscoring its importance as a strategic enterprise asset. It covers everything from the overall strategy and defining terms, through ensuring quality via assessment and cleansing, managing its full life cycle, including archiving and retention according to rules, and finally ensuring availability through backups and restore capabilities. It links back clearly to the foundational APO1 for guidelines, APO03 for architecture, APO11 for quality processes, APO9 for service requirements, DSS-AA6 for operational retention rules, and DSS-04 for business continuity. And the components section highlights specific skills needed, like data analysis, data management, information assurance, key policies, data management policy, privacy policy, and the need for a culture that actively supports data quality, security, privacy, and ethical data use, showing that managing data effectively requires the right combination of people, rules, and culture.
It really solidifies the message that data isn't just a technical byproduct of applications. It's a core asset that requires dedicated planning, organization, and ongoing management integrated across the entire INT function and really the entire enterprise.
Okay, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground there, moving sequentially through all 14 objectives in the align, plan, organize the APO domain. We started way back with APO01, which was all about building the foundational system for INT management itself, the structures, the roles, the policies, and those key definitions like data ownership.
Then we moved straight into APO02, which was about setting the INT strategic direction, making sure it was in tight alignment with the enterprise goals, assessing the current state, envisioning the future state, informed by risk, and building the roadmap to get there.
From strategy, we went to APO03. The blueprint creating the detailed enterprise architecture across business, information, application, and technology domains, and planning the transition from the current to the target architecture.
We then looked at APO04, which was a bit different, actively fostering innovation, connecting it to business needs, scanning the horizon for new opportunities, and nurturing promising ideas within a structured process.
With the direction, blueprint, and innovation drivers in place, we then looked at managing the core resources needed to actually execute. APO05 focused on managing investment portfolios to ensure value delivery. APO06 drilled into managing budgets and costs with financial discipline. And APO07 tackled managing the crucial human resources, the people, ensuring they have the right skills and are utilized effectively.
Next, we covered the vital connections outwards to stakeholders. APO08 was about managing relationships to ensure satisfaction and build partnership. APO9 focused on formalizing expectations through service agreements and rigorously monitoring performance against them. And APO10 dealt with managing external suppliers to ensure they deliver value while managing the associated risks.
And finally, we explored those really critical cross-cutting planning and organizing aspects that are essential for success. APO11 on establishing and managing quality throughout INT, APO12 on identifying, analyzing, and responding to INT risks and integrating that into enterprise risk management, APO13 on establishing and managing information security, including that pivotal risk treatment plan, and lastly, APO14 on managing the enterprise's data assets effectively and securely across their entire life cycle.
By walking through these objectives one by one, just as they're presented in the source material, you can really see how the APO domain systematically builds the necessary foundation for effective INT management and governance. It's like the engine room, where strategy is defined, resources are allocated, risks are understood and planned for, security frameworks are established, and data is treated as a core asset, all before you start the significant work of building, acquiring, or running solutions in the later domains.
It really clarifies that effective INT isn't something that just happens by accident. It requires deliberate, structured planning and organization across all these interconnected areas: strategy, architecture, portfolio, resources, relationships, quality, risk, security, and data. Understanding these objectives provides a really robust framework for thinking about how to ensure INT is aligned, well-planned, and properly organized to deliver value and manage risk for the entire enterprise.
And having seen just how deeply intertwined all these elements are, how data ownership defined way back in APO01 directly impacts security and data management in APO14, or how risk analysis in APO12 informs strategy in APO02 and security planning in APO13, or how quality monitoring in APO11 feeds back into relationships in APO08 and service agreements in APO9, it really makes you consider, in the face of constant business change and pressure, how effectively do organizations truly manage these planning and organizing activities as a single integrated system rather than as disconnected silos?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? If you're addressing strategy here, risk over there, data somewhere else, all in isolation, are you missing those crucial dependencies and feedback loops, the ones that could ultimately undermine your ability to execute effectively down the line when you get to the building and running phases? It makes the case for a really cohesive, integrated approach to INT planning and organizing even stronger.
It certainly does. A lot to think about indeed. We hope this deep dive into the align, plan, organize domain has given you some valuable insights and a clearer understanding of these critical foundational areas of INT management.
Thanks for joining us.